Hello, hello, hello. We are back, and by we, I mean me and Chris. Chris, say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you again.
He takes directions
Virtually,
well,
virtually.
virtually. So, we wanted to do some more questions because you all had such a tremendous response to the first 10. So, Chris, if you're up to it, I'd like to do another 10 questions. How about you?
I think we get at it. And look, you guys are going to have to give us a little slack today. Today it's our Sunday rest day. And so if we come in and out of uniform today, we're just relaxed here. Candace insisted that we do this, though, so that we make sure that we keep giving you some fodder as you're practicing for your exam. So we're glad to
Exactly.
be here.
And one of these days we'll get back to being live. But until then, let's do these questions. So, Chris, why don't you start with question number one? Read it and give them their answer choices.
A buyer makes an offer on a home on 1515 Sycamore Street and adds language that the offer will remain valid for 3 days. On the second day, the buyer finds a preferable property and calls the seller to rescind the offer prior to acceptance. Which of the following is true? Is it A, the buyer cannot rescind until 3 days has expired? Is it B, the buyer can rescind at any time prior to acceptance? Is it C, the buyer can rescind, but seller will keep earnest money? Or is it D, buyer can rescind, but seller can sue for compensatory damages?
Now, here's the first thing I would say about this question, right? It's long. And we hear this a lot from students saying, hey, I get in there and I'm just so confused and the questions are so long. I would say don't panic. Take the question, don't just read it once, read it twice, but then I like to reword it to myself. So basically, a buyer made an offer, turned in that offer, and that offer said, hey, it's only good for 3 days. But before the 3 days ended, they changed their mind. Can they rescind? Can they not rescind? That's what I am seeing from this question. So what are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit last week. There's sometime if you get the clue, and unfortunately, sometimes, Candace, when I'm reading, my voice may inflect on something. I tried not to do that today, but here's what I know. A buyer can rescind an offer at any time until it becomes a contract. So once I started reading through this question, and I saw that it was the case that the buyer did rescind and it had not yet gone under contract, I already knew what the answer was. However, I do want to work backwards into that as well, because as we were talking about these answers, the answers earlier today, we talked about the idea that all of them have a possibility somewhere in the test. So, for example, look at A. The buyer cannot rescind until 3 days has expired. How many times, Candace, in this class do we see the number 3 days?
Oh my God. That is why I make that list of testable dates and numbers. There's so many testable dates and numbers, and it's in that essentials list that people get from me because 3 days. No, in our state, yes, we see 3 days a lot, but I also see it in many other states. It's so easy to get confused. So it's a plausible answer because you might go 3 days. That sounds familiar. But in this case, I would say that is not the answer.
That is not the answer. Can we go ahead and reveal the answer to them, Candace?
Sure. Our answer is going to be the buyer can rescind at any time prior to acceptance, which is what you said. While you were
That's
reading
correct.
the question, that sentence came out and it said, the buyer finds a preferable property and calls the seller to rescind the offer, excuse me, prior to acceptance. Rescinding prior to acceptance is the key. And I think what you were saying is that once you know the answer to be true, you just find the answer that matches.
Yes. And I do want to rule out C and D since we started down that path.
Hmm.
Buyer can rescind, but seller will keep the earnest money. Well, if the buyer had breached, then the seller would in fact have been able to keep the earnest money. So that is built in reality, just not this question. The buyer can't breach until they go under contract. And then similarly in D, buyer can rescind, but seller can sue for compensatory damages. No, there are no penalties to the buyer for rescinding prior to going under contract. Does that sound about right?
Makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And I love the fact that you broke it down because a lot of times students come to me and they say, I'm so anxious about this test. But if in your practice you get used to figuring out why the wrong answers are wrong when you get to the test and you're eliminating more answer choices because you're like, oh, well, that definitely is not right. It helps build your confidence. So I love the way you broke that down, so much so that we're going to move on to number 2, which I will read. Notice I gave you the long question to read. Number 2, as a listing agent, one would most likely act in the capacity of. As a listing agent, one would most likely act in the capacity of, is it A, attorney in fact, B, universal agent, C, general agent, or D, special agent? So this is one, again, vocab. And you and I were just talking about this, Chris, with these questions. Sometimes just knowing the vocab helps you eliminate answer choices. It's a plausible answer. It could be a real vocab word, but it's not the vocab word for this question. So in this case, we have to know what our vocab means. So Chris, what is an attorney in fact?
Interestingly enough, the first two answers are technically the same. An attorney of fact is a power of attorney, among which would be something like a universal agent. So universal agent, I often associate with a power of attorney. So an unlimited power of attorney, literally.
Yeah.
So those two, I kind of put in the same basket, and I eliminated both of them because that's not the way an agent acts.
Yeah, and also it can't be the same. Can't be A or B if they're basically the same thing. So
That's a great point.
Cannot be the answer, which leaves us with C and D, a general agent versus a special agent. Well, when I think of general agent, I think of a property manager or like a sports manager or anything like that, because I know general agency means you have controls and you can make some independent decisions in one portion of somebody's life. So if I think about a property manager, so Chris, I know you have investment properties. That investment property manager is only in charge of your investment properties. If somebody has a broken water heater, they can make those decisions to fix it or repair it and then just let you know what happened later. That person cannot make those same decisions for the water heater in your home. They're not in that part of your life, and it's just not them. So when I think a general agent, they have some kind of control in a general area of somebody's life, like property management for investment properties. If I think of a sports manager, that sports manager can help you with work-related sports teams decisions, but they shouldn't be deciding what car you drive because that's not their area of your life. Versus special agent, we know, or I know you say this too. Actually, I'm pretty sure. I think you say this. The world's most famous special agent, of course, is 007. Right? Because right. It's an agent. If you work for the FBI or the CIA or name one of those other ones, MI6, isn't that what it is in England, whatever? Miss Congeniality, the best movie ever. You know, a lot of these movies and a lot of things we hear about are when these special agents, I'm special agent somebody and such special agent somebody. There's always this movie plot where they go off and they do their own thing, even though they were told X. And that is the heart of special agent. When you're a special agent, you have been given a single task and you must follow all instructions as long as they're legal, and you can't make independent decisions on your own. And that to me sounds like what a listing agent would be doing. If that listing agent tells you to price the house, or the listing agent, if the seller tells you to price the house at $600,000 and you've told them you think it's only worth $525, guess what you are listing that house at? $600.
Yeah, you do as your client says. You brought up an interesting thing there, and to be honest with you, these first two questions, Candace, are spot on, because this is likely the weight at which they would test it on the exam. The general agent, Candace mentioned property manager, and my property managers do actually have the authority to sign my contracts. I'm not going to come in and sign every lease. They're given the authority to do that. Candace, does my listing agent have the authority to sign the offer to purchase and contract?
Not unless they want to go to real estate jail.
Yeah, and that's a very testable topic, how that's handled.
I love it. Well, hit them up with number 3 there, because we can see the final answer is special agent.
Okay, my turn. It's a short one as well, so I'll take this one. All of the following are examples of appurtenances except, and I forgot about the people that were driving, so let me reread that. All of the following are examples of appurtenances except A, restrictive covenants, B, licenses, C, riparian rights, D, easements. What do you think, Candace?
We got that except question. Now, guys, I know that as a teacher, I've been told there's going to be less and less of these except questions on the test. But one, I don't trust anybody, except maybe Chris. So even though I know I'm not really, they say you're not going to get these on this test, I can't say that's true for every state, and I can't say that they've been eliminated 100%. So get used to answering them, because it's about your skills and your ability to look at the details. And guess what? As an agent, those details matter when you're helping somebody fill out a contract. So when I see that except, this question is telling me all of the following are. So that's telling me 3 things are true, 1 is false. And I will always go through and then put 3T, 1F. 3T, 1F, 3F, 1T. So I want to go through and label my answer choices true or false, true or false, true or false. So when I look at A, the question becomes, are restrictive covenants appurtenant? Well, Chris, what does appurtenant even mean? And are restrictive covenants appurtenant?
The way that I like to use the word appurtenance, or if I was writing a definition, I would say it's a right or privilege that has the characteristic that it runs with the land. Okay, there's 2 parts of that. A right or privilege, that's part of it, but another part of it is that it runs with the land. And so when you look at the word restrictive covenants, you may say, hey, the first part of that sentence doesn't match. Restrictive covenants don't sound like a right or privilege. Well, remember, restrictive covenants could also be referred to as protective covenants. You know, in my neighborhood, I don't love it when I'm restricted, but I love it when my neighbor is restricted. That protects my property value. So it is, in fact, a right or privilege, and restrictive covenants run with the land. And I used that logic on all 4 of these, and there was only one of them that did not meet that criteria.
Exactly. So restrictive covenants could also be known as protective covenants, depending if you're the one being restricted or you're the one being protected, also known as CC&Rs. Sometimes you'll hear them called CC&Rs. What is that? Conditions, covenants, and
Yeah, restrictions.
restrictions. There you go. I always get the C's.
Conditions, covenants, and restrictions, yeah.
Yeah. Why can't it be like cookies, cakes,
Cake.
and I don't know what starts with an R. What dessert starts with an R? But it sounds so much better. Cookies and cakes. So we know it's not restrictive covenants because they run with the land, or I like to say they paperclip to the land. You pick up the land, you're going to get the restrictive covenants too. You know, when I talk about appurtenances, I always say think of dating somebody who has a kid. You're not just getting the person you're dating. The kid is appurtenant too. I don't know why. That always just occurs to me. But restrictive covenants are appurtenant. Now, you said that the bottom 2 were also appurtenant, which are riparian rights. We know those are our water rights. And we got easements, the right to use or cross somebody's land. Well, yes, all of those would go with the purchase of a land, the transfer of land. But licenses? I got to say no to licenses. Licenses are not going to be appurtenant because when the land transfers, the license is over.
Right. Right. And that's when I look at the word licenses, in these things, I think, well, that sounds like it might be a privilege that someone would get in a piece of property, but it absolutely does not run with the land. So it didn't meet both criteria.
And that's why it's also not an encumbrance. Because it
Correct.
ends when you transfer the land, it's not appurtenant, nor is it an encumbrance. So licenses is our answer. And now let's go to our question number 4. An unmarried owner of real property dies without a valid will. In what manner will his real property be dispersed? An unmarried owner of real property dies without a valid will. In what manner will his real property be dispersed? Is it A, to a devisee, B, to the state by a sheet, C, to his heirs by descent, or D, auctioned as state property? I love this question because, again, it sticks to what we've been talking about. All of these answers sound good. Like, Chris, if you did not study for your exam or you only half studied for your exam, all of these sound plausible, but only one is correct. All of these could be the right answer to a different question, but only one of these is the right answer to this question. So where would you start? Is there anything? Well, I'm going to start actually. Is there one that I could eliminate? Well, I'm going to eliminate A just because I love the word devisee, because a devisee has to do with a device, and a device is a transfer of real property by will. So if I know my definitions, a device has to do with wills, and they said there was no will, so that's out. To a devisee is out because there was no will. And if I know my vocab word, can't use it. What would you eliminate next, Chris?
First of all, that was a good pick. This is like if you were playing the game or something, you had the first one to take off the board. If you knew that the word devise went with will, you could have eliminated it. The one that I'm going to take off the board is the tough one, to the state by escheat. And the reason for that, Candace, is I have drilled myself on this, and I say it over and over in class. If you die with a will, the property goes to your devisees. But we just told you he doesn't have a will. If you die without a valid will, you have died intestate, and your property goes to your heirs. Only if you die without a valid will and heirs does it go to the state by escheat. So do you see what they did in this question, Candace? They threw the word escheat in there. So you would say, hey, no will. It's going to go to the state.
Totally.
But
It's like no will, no will, no will,
Yep.
a sheet. But that's exactly what we don't want you to do. And I think you said it great.
That's right.
It never occurred to me like this. It is like playing a game. It's like, okay, we each get a chance to take an answer off the board and why. So if you're somebody struggling with, this isn't as much fun, or it's all complicated and they're trying to trick me, think of it like a game. Which answers can you take off the board? I love that, Chris. I've never heard you say that before. I don't know if you just came up with it, but I love that. It's a game. Eliminate the answers.
Well, you know it to be true, though, because you know that one of the most powerful ways for people to do well on the exam is to form study groups. And it's in these study groups where you can challenge each other and you have to be transparent about what you know and what you don't know. And playing games like that can really help you get to the crux of the question.
So yeah, if you've got a study group, play it like the way we do these answers. Which would you take off the board? Okay, I'm going to take this one off the board. So far we've taken off A and B. It's not to a devisee. It's not to the state by a sheet, because we're not going to get fooled. We know to take this off the game. So now we have to his heirs by descent or auctioned as state property. Now, auctioned as state property, when did this become state's property? I know auctioned as state property sounds good, but to me, that sounds like the state had to get it. And the only way the state would have gotten it through this death would be if they left it to them, but there was no will, or if it escheated to the state. And you just said escheat means you died without a will and no valid heirs. And then no valid heirs brings me back to his heirs by descent, which in this case is the right answer. To his heirs by descent is about, okay, when you die, if you die without a will, there are laws in every state that say, oh, your children get it, your spouse gets it, your parents get it, your siblings get it, who's in your family. And then there's an order, a pecking order. Like when you watch these movies where people are like, you had this long lost maiden aunt and now you are the heir, because that's what the law says. The law says they have to find people in your bloodline, and there's laws that talk about the order of that. So yeah, you die without a will. We're going to start looking at your heirs, and we're going to follow the rules of our state about which heirs get it. Anything to add to that, Chris?
Only that, did you notice some of the words that we threw in as we were talking about this? For example, Candace was just talking about intestate succession. So she mentioned this a little bit earlier, words that go in categories. We mentioned even last week in the first 10 questions that we did, the test is really picky about what happens when you die or if you get divorced. If you have a life change, the test really studies that. So make sure you know which word goes with which topic and relate logical terms.
Oh my God, such a good point. Like when we talk about estates and deeds and things like that, what happens if somebody dies or gets divorced? We talk about contracts. What happens if somebody dies or get divorced? Is it a sales contract? Is it an agency contract? Like we talk about what happens when people die a lot in this class. Like if you were to buy property, if well, I guess I don't want to say if you to buy property, but it kind of relates. Like you talk about life changes. If Chris has that investment property and then he sells it to me, that's a big life change for him. Now we got to wonder, does the lease stay in place or does the lease transfer with the property? Well, the lease transfers with the property, but we talk about death. We talk about these life changes a lot in this class. What happens when somebody dies? What happens when somebody sells? What happens when, all these things. So
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor that point, but the fact of the matter is this is not law school. So if you just know the words that relate and stay away from the, well, what if this, don't go down that rabbit hole.
Yep.
Relate very closely what you know and don't drill down into things that we're not going to need to know as agents.
Don't go down the what if trail, but know what happens if somebody dies for each scenario. Just that's where you can end it right there.
Yep.
All right, let's do a number 5, which I believe is you. It is your turn to read if you are able.
Okay, good. It's another short one. All the following are considered estates of inheritance except, and again, all of the following are considered estates of inheritance except A, life estate per autre vie, and I don't speak French, so per autre vie is as good as you're going to get. B, fee simple conditional. C, conventional life estate, or D, fee simple absolute. Which of those is not an estate of inheritance? Take it away, Candace.
Okay. Well, I love teaching estates, and I do believe you do too. So whenever I think of estates, I like to think of a chart that really 2 charts, but a chart that I kind of made up, and I'm going to show it to you, Chris, because I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I find it very helpful. It's my chart of estates. And I know you're looking at it and going, this does not look like something I would see in law school, because it's not something you would see in law school. This is Candace putting the estates in her own terms. Now, what you all might have seen is a chart that's got fee simple absolute, fee simple conditional, fee simple, with the condition subsequent, determinable. You got non-freehold estates. Whoa. There is a lot of information on charts. In fact, I want to say those charts look something like this. Which this is a screenshot, y'all, from a video that I have that I talk all about estates. And I actually go over deeds as well in that video. Do I go over deeds in that? Maybe I do. I do estates and tenancies in this video. So if you're looking for it, you can see the title of it there. But we've seen a chart that looks similar to this. I like to dumb it down, and I like to say, okay, we got 4 levels in that chart. If you look at any of those charts, it starts at the left-hand side, and then it goes all the way to the right-hand side. And the question that those charts answer is, how long are you friggin' going to own the estate? How long are you going to own it? Because we know by definition, an estate means you have an interest strong enough to have possession. You can live there. Great, you can live there, but do you live there because you own it? Or are you all the way on the right-hand side of the chart with you never owned it? So our fee simple absolutes means you own it forever unless you choose to get rid of it. The step down from that is a fee simple defeasible, which means you could possibly own it forever. Your title could be defeated or ended. As long as you follow the rules, you and your heirs could own it forever, but you break those rules, you could possibly lose ownership. Our next step down would be life estates, and we've got different types of life estates, but in all cases, ownership is based off of somebody's lifetime. And since nobody lives forever, since Prince and Michael Jackson failed me, they both died. That was not supposed to happen. Since nobody lives forever, then it was never meant to be forever. So, Chris, does it kind of make sense how I went from own it forever to possibly owning it to forever to you never were ever going to own it forever? And then our last step is you never owned it, like when you lease. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. And if it doesn't make sense to the students, I would kind of encourage them to force themselves to make it make sense to them. There's another way of talking about this. We could talk about the vocabulary associated. For example, the word freehold. I know the word freehold has a fancy definition. It sounds something like it's estates of at least a lifetime. But I just think of freehold as being ownership. So we're on that first step up there. We do own it. But the word fee, F-E-E, denotes inheritability. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but if I have the ability to own it for my lifetime and then I can choose who it goes to, in theory, I own it forever. And that's what we mean by owning property forever.
Hmm. I love it. And you'll see if you watch this video, I break down all those definitions for you. So, estate means possession, freehold means ownership, non freehold means you're leasing. A fee means inheritable, defeasible means it could end. So I'm right there with you. It can be complicated, guys, but like Chris said, take those big fancy words, make them simple, and then once you understand the simpleness of it, go in and just think, where on these steps does it go? I owned it forever. I could possibly own it forever. I was never going to own it forever, or I never owned it. But if you can understand that and you can understand that chart, sometimes, you get those scraps of paper in the test. This is one of those things I tell people, brain dump at the beginning of the exam. If you know you've got this chart in your head, brain dump it so that once you get to the question, you can kind of figure out where you want to go. So one of the things Chris just said is fee means inheritable. And the question is asking us, all of the following are considered estates of inheritance except. So that means our two fee answers, fee simple conditional and fee simple absolute, can't be our right answer because fee means inheritable. So we're looking for the except. We're looking for the false. So Chris, would you agree we can get rid of B and D because of the word fee?
Absolutely. That's a perfect explanation of that.
And here's what I tell my students. You got these life estates. Life estates are based off a person's life. If the life estate is the measuring life, whose life we're basing it on, and the life tenant, the new owner, are the same, it's conventional. If it's a life estate pour attribut, the life estate and the life tenant and the measuring life are different. Just like the words pour attribut are a different language. The measuring life and the life tenant are different. Or the other cheat is the word V rhymes with fee, thus it's inheritable. Cha-ching!
Hey, I
love something like that. V rhymes with fee. That bad boy is inheritable. So I would go with A as the right answer. But why don't you remind them, Chris?
Oh, wait a minute. We're looking for the exception here.
Sorry. That's right. Look at me. I'm messing it up. I'm messing it up, guys. We're looking for the exception. So that means our answer is going to be conventional life estate. Give it to him, Chris, since you had to tell me what the right answer was.
Okay. Conventional life estate. Now, Candace, this is one of the things I've said for years that has helped my students. Mm-hmm. On the life estate per HRV, you first of all, you can't understand it. The fact of the matter is that's one of the places where you could drill down. How could someone own the property for the life of another? Well, what I tell people about the per HRV is that it's freakishly inheritable. No per HRV has ever been set up so that the measuring life would let me make sure I'm saying, the owner would outlive the measuring life. No, wait, the other way around. Anyway, long story short, is the way the per HRV is designed is that when the measuring life dies, it's going to go to the next party. Weirdly enough, if the holder of the estate predeceases the measuring life, it's going to go to their heirs as long as the measuring life is still alive. So again, to me, it doesn't really matter what the explanation of it is. It's freakishly inheritable. If for some reason the holder of the estate pulled out in front of a bus today and died and predeceased the measuring life, it would go to their heirs as long as the measuring life was allowed. It's inheritable.
I hear you, and I'm going to go with V rhymes with fee, and it is inheritable. But you're absolutely right. I do give the same example, and funnily enough, because we've been teaching so long together, I say, hey, if I'm the life tenant and I own a pour attribut life estate and I get hit by a bus, so there must be something about us and buses, but it would go to my heirs until the measuring life died. But again, y'all, we could go for days, literally and figuratively, on these estates, but try to simplify it with simple language. And if it does help to know fee means inheritable, V rhymes with fee, so it's inheritable. Absolute means forever. Estate means possession. If knowing the vocab helps you, then go with that. but do not get lost in the weeds. It's a hard thing for us to say because you have to know enough of the weeds to get the question right, but not so much of the weeds that you get lost. All right, let's do the next one. And I believe it is 6. So it is of course, it's a long question. I get to read it. Which appraisal method would be most appropriate for an appraiser looking to determine the value of a large apartment building for an investor client? I'll read it again. Which appraisal method would be most appropriate for an appraiser looking to determine the value of a large apartment building for an investor client? Now, moving past the fact that I hate the words most appropriate, that just makes me sound like I'm sitting at a formal dinner. I do want to think about what I know about appraisals and the fact that you have to be a licensed appraiser to do one, and that when an appraiser sits down to do an appraisal, we know there's different methods or ways to come up with value. And there's 3 major ways that an appraiser can choose from, which is the sales comparison approach, the cost approach, and the income approach. Now, just off the top of my head, when I think appraisals and how they're done, that's what I think. Sales comparison approach, cost approach, income approach. And off the bat, I can see that sales comparison approach is not on this list. But what would you tell me, Chris? Sales comparison approach isn't on there, but what is on there?
It's interesting. As you were going into that, I was thinking that this is where you have to know your vocabulary. Market data approach and the sales comparison approach are the exact same thing. They're just different names for the same thing.
Yep. So I know could be market data approach or sales comparison approach, income approach, cost approach. So one of the answers I'm going to eliminate is the square foot method, because I know that's a way of determining pricing within the cost approach. It's very definite. This is it's a great vocab word, but not for this question. We want to go with one of the major 3. It's like, are we going with Walmart or Target or Dollar General? Like one of the major 3. And square foot method is it's a smaller option. That's not what we want to go with. So I'm eliminating square foot method. Chris, what would you eliminate next?
Well, you were too kind, because when you took out the square footage method, you also took out the cost approach, because that is a subset of the cost approach. So again, just relating words. You took out one, you took out both of them. Good move. Okay.
Good. I like that. I feel like we're playing that Jenga game. We're taking out pieces of the stack. All right. So that leaves me with market data approach and income approach. And part of this is just me knowing what are the 3, or when are the 3 approaches most appropriate, like they're asking. And guys, this is a very testable thought. The sales comparison or the market data approach is where you have a subject property and you've got to find comps, those comparable properties that are similar. And you use that substitution, the principle of substitution, to say, hey, if this comp over here had 4 bedrooms and 3.5 baths, it sold for $450. Well, what happens if there is a comp if their subject property had an extra bath, right? If our subject property had an extra bath, what we're saying is, oh, this comp property only had 3. I think if it had 4 baths, it would sell for more. And that more number is what my subject property would sell for. So I'm not going to get into detail about this because, again, we have videos on it. But this isn't what we're talking about. We're not talking about usually residential or commercial properties per se. This question is talking about an apartment building for an investor. And what I know about investors is that they care about the cha-ching, the money. And that is the basis of the income approach. An appraiser uses the income approach when the biggest deciding factor is going to be how much money does the property bring in. Now, when it comes to investment properties, Chris, I know you are the investment king, so tell me what you know.
Well, to me, this is one that after you get comfortable with the terminology, you're going to be perfect on it. But you have to be specific. And the income approach is used on income producing properties, but you got to focus on that. The property itself produces the income. So, for example, an apartment building generates income by being an apartment building. A mini storage facility generates income by being a mini storage facility. Let me compare this. I don't want to throw you off course, But when you look at like a McDonald's building for a moment, McDonald's makes money by selling burgers. Okay. The value of that business is going to be based on the number of burgers they sell. So you wouldn't use the income approach on that. You think about a McDonald's, it's just a little odd building out on the middle of Capitol Boulevard if it wasn't for the fact that they sold burgers. The building itself is not how they make the money. They make the money off of burgers. Income approach, the apartments themselves make the money. That's why you use the income approach on that. And then to wrap up, the market data approach, just real quickly, the definition I use on that, Candace, is the sales comparison market data approach you use for single family residential and vacant land. I just forced myself to memorize that.
Yeah, I love it. All right, Chris, well, tell us what you know after we prove that it is B, the income approach. Tell me what you know about this next question.
Okay. The type of lease which would stipulate the lessee pays the real property taxes would probably be, where'd you get the word probably in there, Candace?
Well, I don't know. That's what the question said. It would probably be. No, you joke, but
I'm a,
in real life, there's always a probably in this.
That's
but in
right.
the test, we're going to go with.
Yeah, I'm going to reread that again for those of you that are driving. The type of lease which would stipulate the lessee pays the real property taxes would probably be A, tenant taxation lease, B, gross lease, C, net lease, D, percentage lease. Cool.
Well, I'm going to go first. And I'm going to go ahead and eliminate one, that tenant taxation lease. Because it sounds great, Chris, but I've never heard of a tenant taxation lease before. Have you?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, sometimes people fall for the ones they've never heard of. They're thinking, golly, maybe I should have studied that. 9 times out of 10, it's something that's made up for the fourth possible answer. And Candace was right to eliminate it.
Yep. So it's not A, it's not tenant taxation lease. And I just happen to know it's not D, percentage lease. Because that percentage lease has to do with, oh, I'm going to rent from this landlord. I'm going to pay them a flat fee, but I'm also going to pay them a percentage of the income that comes in after a certain amount. So the more money I make, the more money the landlord makes. And that has nothing to do with taxes. So I'm going to eliminate D as an option as well, which gets me to B and C, Chris. And how would you figure out what the answer is between the two of those?
Okay. When I first looked at this question, I was thinking to myself, is it fair? Should it say the type of commercial lease that would stipulate? But having said that, I like the fact that it left commercial out because it makes you think one step farther than what you normally would. So when I look at the two that are left, gross and net lease, a gross lease is the type of lease that you would have at your apartment building, sometimes called a flat or a fixed lease. Think about this for a moment. When you paid your apartment rent, did you have to go down at September 1st and pay the taxes on your apartment? You did not. But what happens in a net lease, I associate that with commercial leases. And in a net lease, what happens is the tenant pays some of the expenses prorated to the percentage of the property that they're leasing, which often include taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance. So my biggest distinction there, Candace, was the fact that when I pay my apartment lease, gross lease, the landlord pays the rent. If I have a net lease, commercial, I pay my share of common expenses, including taxes.
Yep, I 100% agree. I would say that the answer is net lease. And here's how I tell my students to remember it. Net is spelled N-E-T. Tenant is spelled T-E-N-A-N-T. So that net and the ten and tenant, they go together. And the net lease, the tenant pays for those extra fees. I am
Okay.
always looking for little ways to remember stuff just in case I forget. Like, I know the difference between a gross lease and a net lease, but if I ever doubt myself, if I can have that little thing like V rhymes with fee or net and ten, like the net goes with the tenant, those little things can take you when you're not quite sure on the test, you're doubting yourself. Those little tricks can help a lot. All right, let us do number 8. A seller would like to hire ABC Realty to list their home, but would like to reserve the right to sell it themselves. without owing a commission. Which listing would work best? I'll read it again because that was a lot. A seller would like to hire ABC Realty to list their home, but would like to reserve the right to sell it themselves without owning a commission. Owing, not owning, but owing a commission. Which listing would work best? Is it A, a net listing, B, exclusive agency listing, C, a limited listing, or D, exclusive right to sell listing? Now, before I even get to the question, we just talked about a net lease, and here we go with this word choice, a net listing. So, Chris, my question to you is, are they using the word in a wrong way, or is a net listing a real thing?
Well, I mean, the word net is used a lot in business and real estate to separate it from gross. But having said that, look how closely the words look alike: net lease, net listing. And Candace referred to the fact earlier that sometimes they steal from one part of the exam an answer to put it into another area. So we just had a net lease, which was the correct answer. And now we have net listing, which is not the correct answer here. I'm eliminating net listing because we talked about this a little bit last week. The fact that a net listing really is a way that you earn income as an agent. It's a possible way to be compensated. How did I know that? In that case, I did in fact have to
Know your vocab.
know it as a vocabulary word. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to remind people, in some states, net listings are illegal. In some states, they're just kind of frowned upon. But this is where you as the agent are talking to the seller, and the seller says, I want X. I want $200,000. And anything over that amount, that is your commission. So we're not going to go too deep down that road, but that is a real thing. And Chris said it best. Net can be seen in lots of different ways in this course, but it's the wrong answer for this question. It was the right answer for the last question. So I know it's not net listing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump to C, to limited listing, because the other two are really close. So let me think of what limited listing is. And I know that has more to do with what is it I'm supposed to be doing for my seller client. And a full listing, full service listing, I'm doing everything, meaning they're expecting me to help them market it. They're expecting me to give them assistance with, choosing a price. And once they do get offers, how do they choose a good contract? And then what do they need to do to get through that contract and through the executory period, that period where they're under contract, and then, help them close. Like, I'm doing all the things. I'm there for all the steps. That would be a full service listing. A limited service listing is where a seller will choose to have me help them with some things, kind of like going to a buffet. I might make them flyers for them. I might put the house on the market for them, like put it in the MLS, but after that, they're kind of on their own. So not what I'm talking about here. That has nothing to do with whether or not the seller can sell it or not sell it and pay a commission. So I'm going to eliminate limited listing along with net listing. But Chris, that leaves me to exclusive agency and exclusive right to sell listing. What say you?
Interestingly enough, the first one I would have eliminated would have been D. And the reason that I chose that one is I'm focusing on the phrase in the sentence, in the question, the sellers are selling themselves without owing a commission. Here's what we know about the exclusive right to sell, and in fairness, it's probably because of its vocabulary word, is that as an agent under an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, I'm protected during the term of the listing agreement, regardless of how the house sells. And so most agents endeavor to get an exclusive right to sell listing. Think about this, Candace. If I get a listing and I know that I'm going to be protected, I can justify spending my marketing time, my money, open houses, etc. on that. If I'm concerned about whether I'm going to get paid a commission or not, it's not an exclusive right to sell a listing, and it may in fact affect the level of services.
I mean, I like to think of it as it's the right to sell, and I have the right to the commission if that title is transferred in any way, shape, or form, or agreed to be transferred. I get the right to the commission in all cases, versus an exclusive agency listing. It's less words because there's less opportunities for me to get paid as an agent. In an exclusive agency listing, If the seller finds that buyer, they don't owe me a commission. So I have less opportunities to get paid, which is what this question is asking. They want to reserve the right to sell it themselves without owing a commission. The way to do that, exclusive agency. I don't have the right to always get that commission, right? So I don't know if that makes sense. Hopefully one of our ideas does here, but that gives us the correct answer of B, exclusive agency listing.
Stay on that for just a second. I want to close it out with just some random thoughts. Historically, the commission has said that the exclusive right to sell listing agreement is best for both the agent and the seller. Why is it best for the agent? Because I'm protected. Why is it best for the seller? Well, I can spend my time marketing the property. So they would argue that it's actually best for both parties. And also keep in mind when you're studying, grouping things. Typically speaking, this grouping would include open listing, exclusive agency listing, or exclusive right to sell listing.
Exactly. All right, let's go on to the next question. Number 9 is yours, sir.
Okay. 2 days before closing, a seller refuses to sell their home to the buyer. If the buyer would like the court to force the sale, they most likely A, sue for specific performance, B, sue and ask for damages to be awarded, C, seek a partition settlement, D, do nothing, the seller does not have to sell. And I apologize, I did not read that a second time, so I'm going to read it again. Listen closely to the setup. 2 days before closing, a seller refuses to sell their home to the buyer. If the buyer would like the court to force the sale, they would most likely A, sue for specific performance, B, sue and ask for damages to be awarded, C, seek a partition settlement, or D, do nothing. The seller does not have to sell.
It's so much. It is so much. But what I love about what we do in this class is we've learned a lot about a lot of things, like a little bit about a lot of things in some levels. We're not attorneys, but we've learned a lot about what happens when people try to buy and sell real estate. And what I think of this is what I think about contracts. The whole point to a contract is that if Chris and I agree to something and he changes his mind after he signed a contract, I can tattle to a judge and the judge is going to force him to make the situation right. Like that, isn't that the point of a contract? I want to make sure that Chris has to do what he said he was going to do. So if he said he's going to sell his house to me and then he changes his mind 2 days before closing, I can go tattle to a judge. Right? Now, if I'm trying to buy the house and that's obviously what I want, what is it I want the judge to say? Do I want them to send Chris to his bedroom without any dinner and dessert for the day? Like, that's not really helping the scenario here. I want to sue so that I can actually own the house. Well, I can eliminate D because if y'all know anything about me, the do nothing is not an option. I'm an Aries. Do nothing. No, man, you signed a contract. He has to sell. That is the whole point of selling a contract. Do nothing. Chris, you might watch your tires because I don't know how they got slashed. Do nothing. No. Contract. So I'm going to eliminate D. There is this word partition settlement that maybe I didn't study so well. Chris, what a partition settlement? I think that has to do with a suit for partition. Does that have anything to do with what we're talking about here?
No, you want to relate the word partition back to estates, specifically tenancies in common and joint tenancies. And I know you say, Chris, that's easy for you. You know these words pretty well. But having said that, partition is a tough word. If you know what it's related to, you can rule it out of this question and into that question without having to go on a deep dive about partition. It's not appropriate in this question.
Exactly. Remember, guys, it's going to be a plausible answer, but it's not necessarily the correct answer. That is a great partitions, great for another question, not this one. Then we got B, sue and ask for damages to be awarded. Well, I've got to know my vocab to say damages. We're talking about monetary damages. So I wanted the house. And yes, the judge could say, Chris, you've been a bad boy. Give Candace $5 million, in which case I would probably take it. But just in general, damages are usually going to be referring to monetary damages. So that's not a terrible, terrible answer. But if I signed a contract because I wanted to buy his house, more than likely I'm going to go with sue for specific performance, because specific performance is when a judge forces Chris or anybody else to perform the specific activities they said they were going to do in the contract. If he said he was going to jump up and down on one leg and bark like a dog, well, gosh darn it, now he's got to go do that. He's got to do whatever he's got to perform whatever specific activity he said he was going to do. And in this case, I want him to sell the house, and I would love the courts to force him to perform that specific activity of selling me the house. So I'm going to go with A, specific performance, sue for specific performance. But Chris, I would really love it if you were to jump up and down on one leg and bark like a dog.
I probably not, because I rescinded that part of the offer before we ever signed it. Speaking of which, it's interesting how much we've talked about contracts in just two little questions here. And so there are a couple of truisms. One, from the question that we asked earlier, you could rescind any offer at any time before it becomes a contract. But if you look at the first sentence here, 2 days before closing, I mean, come on, if you're 2 days before closing, you're clearly under contract. And so that's what Candace's conversation was about. If you try to break a contract after it's binding, there are going to be damages. So A and B were possibilities, but then notice the second sentence, I don't want money. I want the property. I want to force the sale. Good answer. That's a great question, by the way.
Thank you. I tried so hard. Now, okay, let's go on to our last question. Which of the following is true concerning an option contract? Which of the following is true concerning an option contract? Is it A, an option contract is voidable by the optionor? Is it B, an option contract creates a time limit to keep an offer open? Is it C, an option contract is bilateral? Or is it D, an optionee is legally bound to purchase the property? All right. Now, Chris, I love option questions, but I have also found in my years of doing this that students often don't understand what an option is. So can I start by explaining it, or how I like to explain it?
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you this question, Chris. Have you ever, even though I know you're not a shopper, have you ever gone someplace, let's say when you were young, recently University of North Carolina, go Tar Heels, we are both grads, yay! University of North Carolina, Tar Heel grads, we're students, we don't have a lot of money, so you go to the thrift store and you see this desk that you would like. You don't necessarily want to buy it right now, but you want to put a hold on it. So you want them to hold it just for you. Nobody else can buy it. And then you'll come back. And as long as you have a truck for somebody to come help you pick it up and take it home, you want it. But you might not want it either. So you put a hold on it so that nobody else can have it. They're only going to sell it to you at the price that they marked on it. But if you decide, oh, you know what, I can't get the truck, so sorry, you didn't have to pay for the whole thing. You just paid them a couple dollars to hold it, and then they'll put it back on the market. I'm assuming this was not just me as a broke recent college grad. You went through that too?
Yeah, absolutely. And the great point about it is, why, Candace, would they be motivated to take it off the market for a little while?
Oh, because you paid them a couple bucks. You didn't pay them the whole price of the desk, but you said, hey, here's $5 or $10. Will you put a hold on it? So you didn't want some other person to come and get it because it was a great desk. You wanted to make sure that only you could buy the desk for that next 24 hours, or maybe you paid $20 for it to be a week. I don't know. But you paid money so that nobody else had access to it, and they had to sell you that desk if you came back. And that is an option. Except instead of a desk, we're talking about a piece of land. This is where Chris has a piece of land that I want. I don't want anybody else to have it. And there's a chance that maybe I don't want it and maybe I won't buy it, but I'm willing to pay Chris money so that for some amount of time, 2 weeks, 3 years, I don't know, but for some amount of money and for some period of time, he is going to sell it to me if I say I want it. But if I don't ever come back and say I want it, Chris just gets to walk away with the money that I used to keep it on hold, or we call that the option. He is buying an option, well, in the the furniture, he was buying an option. From the other story, I would be buying an option to buy his land. You also see this with stocks sometimes. So if you're somebody who invests in stocks, it's a very similar concept. What were you going to say, Chris?
I like where you're going with this. Okay, you gave me some money to take the house off the market. What you actually did was bought the right to buy that property. Okay, now let's look at what both parties have. You now have the right to buy the property, which you may or may not exercise. I have money. If you do not exercise your right to buy it, then I can put it back on the market. But until that time, I'm stuck. So I've got to hope that the money that you gave me was worth me holding it off the market to others. The reason I say that, Candace, is because in eliminating some of the answers here, I look at C and I say an option contract is bilateral. What I want to point out is the fact that you bought a right. You have a right. You could either buy or not buy. But if you say sell, I have to sell it at this point. You have a right that I don't have. Therefore, it's not bilateral. It's a unilateral contract.
We can eliminate C. I love that. And great vocabulary words, bilateral and unilateral. So we got C off the table. Anything else that you think you would eliminate?
I'm going to let you eliminate the next one, but I do want to get the students' focus on the word option-or and option E.
This is why we work so well together, because that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I'm going to focus on those words, option-or and option E, because I think that's going to affect A and D. Now, remember, guys, the or is the person giving, and the E is the person receiving. So when talking about this purchase of land, Chris has land, and I want to pay him for an option to buy it. He is giving an option. He is the option-or, and I would be the optionee. I received the right to buy it. So when I look at A, an option contract is voidable by the option-or. The option-or is the seller. Is this option contract voidable by Chris? And Chris just said no. Chris must sell it. The seller cannot void or not go forward with this contract. It's unilateral. He made a promise to sell. So A is not our answer because of that darn option-or. If this said option-e, that would be a true answer. But it doesn't say option-e. It says option-or, and the option-or must sell. The buyer doesn't have to buy, but the seller does have to sell. And this is where us taking your time, reading the questions and not missing the or the E, which I do a lot even as an instructor. Y'all heard me give the wrong answer a second ago because I wasn't thinking ahead. I didn't go back to my question. This is asking which one is true, not which one is false. All right? So A is a false statement, making it not our right answer because the option nor cannot void. And the flip side of that would be D. The optionee is legally bound to purchase the property. No. Chris, who is legally bound in the option?
Well, if the optionee says that they want to buy the property, the optionor would be legally bound to sell the property. The optionee could either take it or leave it at this point. Now, they're not going to get their option money back if they don't exercise their option, but that's what they paid for. They paid for the right to either buy or not buy.
So the
optionee is not legally bound. The optionee is not legally bound.
Yeah, so we've eliminated A, we've eliminated C, we've eliminated D, which means our answer has to be ding, ding, ding. B, an option contract creates a time limit to keep an offer open. That is probably not the way I would word it, Chris, but it is absolutely true. Because the buyer doesn't have to buy. It's kind of an offer that the seller has to honor if the buyer says they want to go through with it. But it's not forever. It's for some time period. And how long depends on how much did you pay the seller.
Yeah, I would like to get just slightly specific on that. And Candace, I have seen it written. It took me a while to get used to that language as well. But I've seen that some texts will say that the option is basically buying time for the seller to leave an offer open. So it's not uncommon that you might see it that way. The other thing that's important about this, though, is Some things you have to learn on this test. Some things I hope you could be intuitive about. Does it make sense that an option contract has to be very specific in regards to detail? I pay you this amount of money to take it off of the market. That's the option fee, and it's defined in the contract. I'm buying this period of time, and that's defined in the contract. And when I exercise my option, I'm going to buy it for this price, defined in the contract. So options are based on very, very specific terms, predetermined at the time of the contract.
And those terms are so critical. It's one of the things I love about your teaching that I don't do well is I tend to not use the fancy words. I know what the fancy words mean, but my brain tends to simplify it in Candace terms, and then I apply the fancy terms. And one of the things I love is that when you teach, you use the big terms all the time. And I know it's, for some people it's good, for some people it's not so good. There's no one wrong way, but I love the way you focus on the terms and the words, and you don't let yourself get confused by it. So I just want to give you little props for that, just saying.
Well, thank you for that. But when you say them really Southern, see, they don't sound so hard. So that's why I like to do that. And speaking of big words, let me ask you this, Candace. How does the word consideration fit into an option?
So consideration, I know we've been talking about money, 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 but money is a type of consideration. Guys, remember on a legal sense, consideration is anything of value. So if I said, hey, Chris, I want to buy your property, maybe, but here, I'll give you these tickets. Actually, Chris, can you give any type of consideration or can it be money, money?
Well, the way they describe it is valuable consideration, so
Yeah.
as opposed to token consideration.
Yeah,
So,
I wasn't sure. I just had that thought, like,
yeah,
could I give you a dollar or could I give you like Panthers tickets? Could Panthers tickets count? And,
well, right now they're less than $1, but having said that,
well, you know what, Chris, I just had a total teacher moment where I go down the teacher specific lane. So let me just clear this up. What Chris was trying to say is it's consideration is anything of value. So in theory, if we're not going down the completely legal trail here, I could give him those Panthers tickets. I said Jaguars. Panthers tickets so that, in exchange for the option. Now, I'm going to give an asterisk because I feel like I read somewhere that a consideration has to be at least $1, but I don't know if that has to be a money fee, but that's the kind of thing that I would tell you all never to worry about. This is the kind of thing that I will call an attorney and get all nerdy, but you should know that you cannot have a free option, which I think is where you were going that, right, Chris?
that's right. In other words, in a contract, you can't get something for nothing. It wouldn't be fair for the buyer to take your house off the market for a period of time and you get nothing for it. So the option fee is the consideration. What's it the consideration for? It's the consideration for you taking your property off the market. So when you're negotiating, you need to make sure that the consideration reflects the value of you being off the market.
And also, I'm not sure that those Panthers tickets, like you said, have much value. So we're going to check that one out. I mean, we love our teams, but come on, guys, we got to do better. So guess what, Chris? That was number 10, or really, I guess, number 20. Do you think we should do this again? Because I really like doing this with you. I like hearing how your brain works. And I know you're sick of how my brain works, but that's okay.
No, it's not. It's actually great the way that we think because we're not opposite. Obviously, we're on the same page. But the way we word it, and you mentioned earlier that you like the way that I use words occasionally. I like the way that you use examples, and so they're very, very clear. For example, when you're talking about basically the layaway situation at the thrift shop, I mean, very, very understandable. Most people have never done an option contract to buy land. Many people have done basically what amounts to a layaway, where you give some money to hold something for a period of time.
All right. Well, I know that we are going to try to do some more lives right now, guys. You see, you got casual Sunday dress for us today. So hopefully we will see you at the next live. If you have any questions, you can always drop them down in the comments below or reach out to me or Chris at any time, and we'd be glad to help. And then I guess that's it. Any parting words for wisdom for them?
Just as they start looking at these, please respond to them. And as Candace said, if we know what's going through your mind, we can better adapt to how we're answering these questions. So keep that in mind. If you're like, man, I've never been able to understand a deed of trust or whatever. If we know that that's where you're struggling, then we can kind of focus on those topics as well.
Better yet, I say take a screenshot and send us the question. You never know when one of your questions might end up in one of our videos, or better yet, during a live. So, guys, we're going to say good night, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.